CACICA ZAMEACA was one of the few female figures in this historical narrative who was actually taken into consideration by the Spanish when they were planning their settlements. Oviedo lets us know that they actually established Santo Domingo a little bit farther away than where it is currently. Why? He says, por no quitar de aquí la cacica Catalina, as the Spanish named her, a los indios que aquí vivían. So we can conclude that Bartholomew actually met Catalina and he had a conversation with her. And he was considerate of their situation and their home, and he respected it. Oviedo says that Santo Domingo, originally named La Nueva Isabela by Bartholomew in honor of the Taina Isabela, construction of Santo Domingo started about 1494. However, like I said before, looking at timelines, it looks like it was actually around 1496. So even though they moved everything from La Isabela to this region, they didn't actually begin constructing La Fortaleza de Santo Domingo or La Fortaleza de Osama until about 1497. The devastation of disease in La Fortaleza de la Isabela, that there was only about 20 men that were healthy enough to actually move the settlement in the other side of the island and establish Santo Domingo. They were helped by Catalina and the indigenous people who lived with her. She promised to keep them fed and to keep them safe, and she did. She made an alliance with them, and she did her part. We want to remember that all of the Tainos and the Yucayeques and the Caciques were not allied to each other. They were all independent nations that could decide who they would be allied to. Like Guacanagari, she decided to ally herself with the Spanish. If it hadn't been for her hospitality and the willingness to help of ZAMEACA, Spanish settlers would have perished completely in La Isabela. But the rise of Santo Domingo meant the end of La Isabela. Bartolomé de las Casas later says that he actually visited the ruins of La Isabela after the settlement was abandoned, but no one really dared to pass it without great fear and danger. As he writes, because of many frightening noises and voices and horrible ghosts. And he shared this amazing he says that at one point, one of the visitors to the ruins of La Isabela saw two lines of men. They were drawn up in formation in two rows. All of them looked apparently noble, men from the courts. They were very well dressed, with long swords at their side. All of them had cloaks on, which was normal for some of the travels from Spain. People who were visiting the ruins were shocked. How did these people get here all by themselves? And so elegantly dressed as well, without getting themselves dirty or their clothes torn. These visitors decided to greet these men who were lined up, and they questioned them and asked, where did you guys come from? The travelers who were in the formation turned towards them and proceeded to take off their hats. And as they took off their hats, their heads came off, leaving them all beheaded. And then they vanished. Those who witnessed this basically almost died on the spot. They were completely terrified and ran off. They recited for days the first American horror story. Do we know anything else about what happened with ZAMEACA and Miguel Diaz? Miguel Diaz and La Cacica ZAMEACA had two children, and we know that one of them survived, and his name was Miguelico. We know that Miguelico was born around 1496, the same year that the move from La Isabela to Santo Domingo happened. We know that Miguelico, or Miguel Diaz de Au, el joven, was born in Taina. We know that CACICA had one more son or daughter. It's assumed that it was a daughter with Miguel Diaz. We know that by 1497, Miguel Diaz was in a position of authority in Santo Domingo. And by 1500, él era el alcalde del fuerte de Santo Domingo. That same year, Bobadilla, who was sent to replace Colón, arrived. And Miguel Diaz let it be known that his loyalty was to La Familia Colón. He defended him against this new authority, and he was imprisoned for it. The very place he founded with the help of La Cacica, La Fortaleza, is where he was incarcerated. Not only was Miguel Diaz incarcerated, but Cristobal Colon himself was also taken into the fort. After the issues were resolved, he was liberated from the fort and he continued to stay on the island. In 1502, llegó Ovando, Nicolás de Ovando, who was later the author of the devastation of the island. He arrived on the island and found Miguel Diaz and his colleagues, rich men. It is said que una pepita, or a piece of gold, que la CACICA de Miguel Diaz had found weighed 3,300 castellanos. This piece was sent to Spain para la reina Isabela. La Nueva Isabela didn't last long, however. It was destroyed by a hurricane in June 1502, the same year that Nicolás de Ovando moved to the island. He decided that the city or the settlement was better on the other side of the river, where La Cacica, Catalina, or ZAMEACA was located. I believe that because Ovando was able to move the city to the side of the river where her Yucayeque was, that she probably perished at this time. However, we do know that because of alliances, she could have been alive, she could have stayed. And we do have record of a Catalina being a cacica under the encomienda system in Santo Domingo for the 1514 census. We can only imagine what she felt as she saw the Spanish completely take over her home and her village.